if I served you all a lunch here and give it right in front of you, you'd feel all comfortable. If we all put it right here in front of Terry, and we all shared Terry's plate and his silverware and his cup, and we all ate off of it, would you all feel quite as comfortable if Terry was coughing and sneezing?
I wouldn't feel real comfortable about that.
So that's the difference between a food plot and again, with the meal, when you're done with your meal, they take the silverware, it's gone. So it's gone. And it doesn't come back except for it comes back in a plate and it's clean. So you just changed the risk of transmission of a disease. It's not the food itself,
Right.
It's not the feeding, but the risk of transmission is the thing that you're really affecting. So people like to generalize that, yeah, they're all congregating in a food plot. Well, the food plot may be only 2 acres, but what's the bait pile? 10 square feet at the most, it's this big. Spraying it out's better, but it's still, if they're coming back to it, it's just, it's not as good. And Dale's right with the stress is one thing that we try to think we're helping when we kind of get around, there's constraints in the habitat and the support available for a number of deer that are out there, and we try to circumvent that. We start to go into animal science and animal husbandry rather than wildlife. And so you run into the same problems in animal science. What do you do when you get animals concentrated? You have to have very stringent controls on cleanliness, disease, antibiotics, the things that we can't do with wildlife or don't really even want to do with wildlife. So, that's what, in my opinion, the big difference between what you do with the habitat, you manage your habitat. When you start going to food plots and supplemental feeding, you're trying to circumvent Mother Nature, and I can't see anywhere in the world where we've ever done well when we've done that.
So somebody really needs to take that in consideration. If they're going out and putting feed out, whether that be summer to take trail monitoring photos, which a lot of guys do, or winter because they think they're helping their herd, they have to really consider the damage they could do by taking that action.
Well, and I can kind of hit on the other side of it. We talked a lot there about the feeding side of it and the baiting side of it. For the enforcement sides of things, I mean, you have multiple issues. You have the fair chase issue in regards to it. I mean, then there's a big debate on that with multiple states on how you do it, and we won't get into that. But you also look at the enforcement side of things. When you have that salt block or that mineral block that you go out and you put that in that nice little corner of that, funnel where it's coming in out of that field, and your bow stand is up above it, and you put it out there, let's say this time of the year now, and about August you come back and that big block that you had was that big, and now it's only, you got a little rock about this big that's left, and it's like, oh, well, I'm gonna put that in my pocket and I'll be good to go to hunt. All of those rains and everything else that have happened, just all of that went down into that soil. So now you have that big wallow there that you're still, if you took a sample out of that, and we do it a lot, where you take a sample here and you go 15, 20 yards over and you take another sample from that, all of that just went down into that. And so you're hunting over that baited area, which is illegal in the state of Iowa. You can't do that. So you get into the enforcement side of it, and our wardens spend an enormous amount of time following up on those, different examples of where somebody's baiting. And it takes a lot of time to do that. The people are prosecuted, from doing that. And it's kind of like, well, hey, I was just trying to help. I was just trying to do it. And just like Willie and Dale both said there, we're trying to prevent things and bad things from happening down the road if they would. And it's all of that balance.
It's such a double-edged sword, because the compassionate side of a hunter wants to help them through the winter when you're actually being somewhat detrimental, and stress is probably first and foremost, not only the transmission side of things, but until CWD is recognized, we're not faced with that just yet, but we could be down the road. But you don't want to see them starve through winter months, particularly the snow and the frigid temperatures we've had. So it's a tough situation, but it sounds like you're right. We've never won the battle when trying to outdo Mother Nature or even help Mother Nature. So I guess you got to sit there and watch them starve, which is the worst part of the whole.
She wins every time.
She does win every time.
The best thing to do is to keep your deer herd at a level that you shouldn't see much starvation. Where we see in the last few winters is where herds are bumping up against that level.
Carrying capacity.
Yeah. And in normal years, or what used to be normal, I mean, I don't know what normal is with the weather patterns, the way they've changed over the last 5 years. If we keep having this snow, I'm gonna have to find a warmer place to move to.
It's been bad.
It's been bad. So our carrying capacity's just come down some during those years. Now, if it goes back up and we get some more normal Iowa-type winters where we don't have that, we shouldn't see that kind of mortality like you guys have experienced. You know, listening to you, I'm concerned, and it makes me think and rethink, and I'm going to be thinking probably for the next year on what exactly is going on there. So.
I will say one thing.
It's alarming.
Farm equipment has changed so much over the last few years. Years ago, they could survive off of cut cornfield. They can't survive anymore. There isn't enough kernels left in a cut cornfield.
It's all gone.
It's gone. It
That's
isn't
a
there.
great point.
They
It's
still
gone
go
within
there, but
2
there's no
weeks.
food there.
It's gone.
Once you see a farmer pick a field, deer hit it, they know right now, they hit a key on it for the next
nothing
week or
left.
two.
That food
and
source
it's
is gone. Yeah, that's a great point. One of the
Yeah, the way the
that's-
chemicals and machinery and everything.
Now,
has
do you
changed.
see the same, I guess, thinking about, wildlife in general, do you have the same concerns, obviously maybe not CWD, but for like turkeys and for pheasants, on that same feeding issue?
I'll just mention a little bit, one of the things, and it gets back to your compassion for the wildlife and stuff, one of the things that you see, and especially in the wet weather we have in the late summer and early fall, you see aflatoxin in your corn and stuff. And so you think you're doing, can't sell it to market, so you say, dump it out there for food for wildlife. Well then, it doesn't have a big impact on the ungulates like the deer and stuff, but it is very detrimental on deer or on turkeys and pheasants and quail and your songbirds. And so, and then when you're putting out a bait pile that you get some of that mold growing on out there, you might be thinking you're doing good, but you're actually having a bigger impact than you think.
Turkeys don't take that very well. Why don't you
they
elaborate just a little bit, Dale, on alpha toxins, because a lot of the viewers may or may not know about them.
Right. Well, what you get again is, it's a bacteria that you get, or a fungus that you get in the fall. That the levels when you have the high moisture content and stuff, and you have a wet fall, you don't get the corn, the grain dried down and stuff, or you put it out on ground, that's wet and stuff, and so you get that mold growing and stuff, and so while animals will consume it, and again, it's not too hard on deer. It is very hard on turkeys and birds and stuff. So it's.
I don't know if there's any truth to this, but our properties that we have in northern Missouri there, the rain has been so severe over the last 3 springs that the dirt has actually changed colors, and there's a mold growing on just about everything. And I wonder if that isn't somewhat responsible for some of the turkey population decline that we're seeing, in addition to the predation and the lack of nesting and nests being destroyed and everything out there. It seems like
literally some of this dirt hasn't dried.
it has
There's
not.
places where it just won't
3
dry.
years, in 3 years in northern Missouri, some of the soil has not dried out. And I know a drought's coming. I just don't know when. But it's got a different color, and
Is that
there's mold
possible,
growing.
Willie?
There's mold growing everywhere.
If it's that tough on the turkeys, is that part of the decline, or you think it's more about production?
I would guess it's more about production, simply because turkeys in the southeast United States have a lot more rainfall, though the hydrology is different, so I couldn't say without asking around and seeing if somebody's done some more studies on that. I don't know. That's a good question.
I noticed it on my soil there that it's changing colors, and it's just it's like it's rotten, like the dirt, the soil itself is
smell
rotted.
it.
Well,
It
it
smells,
It's
yeah.
nasty. It's
Well,
exactly.
it used to be that southern Iowa would have a drought every 5 years, every 2 to 5 years, every 1 out of 5, maybe 2 out of 5 years, and now it's the yield issue is too much water, not too little. And it's amazing how that's changed.
Just for the last 4 years, basically?
Yeah, 4 or 5 years, yeah.
And it will change back.
But
We'll
I mean,
be praying
but
for
before
rain.
that they still didn't have droughts. They had good yields for a long time. And me being in the real estate business, I used to tell people, I said, this is unusual the last 10 years because we haven't had a drought forever, and realize that the hybrids can handle it better, but instead of having a lack of moisture, we've had way too much. And I think, like you say, I think that's got a lot to do with a lot of things. But when you're talking about wintering over the winter, on a normal CRP field in southern Iowa, is there much nutrition out there through the winter? I mean, you're talking brome, and is there a
Trefoils.
pretty good carrying
Is it
capacity in
trefoil?
that? The dormant grasses, January, February.
Deer are browsers, and they'll certainly eat the dry matter. It won't. And here, the strategy with the deer is they put on weight up until the snow comes, and so they need to be in pretty good shape once January hits. And then their metabolism changes where they're just trying to coast until green up. So all they need is a source of browse and a source of roughage to keep their guts going, and they're going to lose weight. They're not going to stay the same. And if they're not disturbed and they've got good cover and good habitat, they should do okay. Brome's not great, but it's not the worst that's out there. It's, you know, it's something.
There's something to go through their system.
Exactly.
Move on, next question.
Okay. It takes us down to virtually the last one. Did anybody else have anything else on baiting and feeding at all?
The only one thing I would say is, and maybe this is an easier way for people to think about it, is risk and reward. If baiting and feeding was something I thought was going to help the deer population and the resource, you know, I think we and probably that's in the past, we were less concerned about diseases like CWD and things, and we had less concern. But now when you start to look at the risk, it may be very, very small risk, but the consequences of that risk are tremendous, and so we have to be very, very careful. And the reward side is, if we're doing the right things with the habitat, we should have good deer populations. We've got good climate, we've got good production. We really shouldn't need to do supplemental feeding, and there's not much evidence anywhere that supplemental feeding really helps the long-term health of a deer herd.
The other thing to mention on that, you know, when you look at the surrounding states, you know, that where baiting might be legal or feeding, you know, and so the first thing they do when they get a major disease is they ban baiting and feeding. We're trying to be proactive to get that out in front of this because of the risk. It might be small, but it's great to the resource, and so that's why we're trying to be proactive at it.
Well, and I guess we've kind of all answered here, but what are your guys' thoughts? When you look at that risk versus reward, like Willie just talked about, and the different methods, whether it be food plots or different ways to sustain that population, I mean, throughout the winter, is it necessary? Do you, when people come up there and talk to you, I mean, it's like, oh, by God, if I get rid of that corn pile, it's going to end all my hunting. What do you think the general public, or what are your thoughts on it?
Well, we have teams literally in 30 different states across the country. So how they hunt and the styles in which they hunt vary differently. So we're constantly portraying different messages to our consumer based on where you hunt. You can go to Kansas and you can pile it that high and shoot the buck with his head buried in the pile. So we have to defer to the state and go, you know what, if it's legal there and they've said it's legal, then that's okay. My personal opinion is, and I go to the school of Dr. Grant Woods, I talk to him all the time, you know, and I'm always talking to him. I don't like my deer to interact a lot because of the social stress. I would just as soon have fewer deer, have a lot more food in a lot of different places, and not let them congregate. That's my personal opinion. So therefore, I don't bait and I don't feed and I don't even hunt where it's legal. So I don't ever do it. But if it's legal, I'm not going to you know, say, you know what, you shouldn't be doing that, you know, that everybody has to do what they want to do and have the hunting success based on, you know, in Ohio, guys, man, they pile it that high. Michigan, they pile it that high. Kansas. So you can't knock them. They've been doing it for years. It's no different than party hunting tradition in Iowa. Sure. Is it right or is it wrong? But my personal view is I like my deer to be spread out and not socially stressed.